Okay, well, it's a great pleasure to be invited to talk about my three favourite subjects, fostering, attachment and the teenage years. So I've been working in the area of fostering and attachment for about 17 years, and some people here have been caring for children longer than that in foster care and working in foster care longer than that. But certainly for me, it's a daily preoccupation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and make connections for you really between attachment issues in the teenage years and permanence, because permanence is the goal of the care system in this country. So I'm going to try and unpick really what we mean by attachment, in particular in the teenage years, and connect it to social work and foster care practice. I'm going to make connections between security and resilience and think about the meaning of a secure base from infancy to adolescence. And then think about providing a secure base for teenagers in foster care. And the research I'm going to use for this, I'm going to use mainly qualitative research, but from a number of different studies. So you can start to hear in the way that carers talk and young people talk about what attachment and security in foster care means to them. And then we'll think a little bit about practice messages. I'm going to be drawing on a number of different studies. The first group are all studies that I've conducted at UEA. They're all studies that if you go to the Centre for Research on Children and Families website, you'll find details, downloadable reports, summaries, and so forth. They include studies like Part of the Family, which was interviews with 40 adults who grew up in foster care. And then a very important in my career, growing up in foster care longitudinal study funded by the Nuffield Foundation, Birth Parents of Children in Foster Care, which was a great eye-opener for me, and that was funded by the ESRC. And then another very important study for me, the Care Planning for Permanence in Foster Care study, also supported by the Nuffield Foundation. And the last two, Looked After Children and Offending, Care Planning and the Role of the IRO, funded by Big Lottery and the ESRC respectively. I mean, the other major source for you in exploring issues in relation to attachment and foster care is the work of the University of York, and I just want to sort of credit their work, really, because I think their work has been fantastic in helping us develop this area. So I wanted to start really by this definition of permanence, which comes from the care planning guidance. Permanence is the framework of emotional permanence, attachment, physical permanence, stability, and legal permanence. The carer has parental responsibility for the child, which gives a child a sense of security, continuity, commitment, and identity. So within that, some of the words you've been hearing all day are cropping up. Security in particular. Interestingly, we haven't dealt much with identity today, even though that's such a key element of adolescence. So I'm going to say a little bit about that. But it's crucial to our understanding of permanence. But notice the key element of attachment. It gets first mention, and for most social workers, most courts making decisions, we know that attachment is going to be used quite a lot. I also have to say that it's a term that is also misused quite a lot. I noticed that the unsuccessful intervention was an attachment-based one, so I have to comment on that. I'm afraid some of the most harm that's been done to children has been done in the name of attachment, holding therapies and various other kinds of things. So it's terribly important that everybody checks when other professionals use the term attachment in relation to anything, but particularly foster care, that they know what they're talking about. So broadly speaking then, the objective of planning for permanence is to ensure that children have a secure, stable and loving family to support them through childhood and beyond. Now, one of the problems that's developed in practice is that much of the focus on attachment and permanence has been on young children. I think it's really important that we understand that even children coming into placement in adolescence are entitled, says the law, says the guidance on the law, to a permanence plan. So that applies equally to a 15-year-old as it does to a 2-, 3-year-old, young children who are placed for adoption. These older children will be looking for that list of benefits from foster care. So I'm just going to give you two slides. The first is about a secure base in infancy and the second in adolescence, because I want us to stop thinking about attachment as only something about babies and small children and focus on it in relation to adolescence. So Bowlby's concept, so why do I think secure base is such a useful concept for all children in foster care, but probably particularly for adolescents? So in infancy, the attachment figure needs to provide a secure base for exploration. Absolutely critical that we're not thinking about close relationships in themselves. We're thinking about what close relationships allows a child to do, to explore, to enjoy education, to find activities satisfying. Absolutely crucial. That's why I've never called any of the work that I do forming a secure attachment. I find that's a sort of a gold standard thing that actually sets up many situations and placements to fail. Secure base, though, gives us a much broader sense of what a child needs. So the availability of a secure-based relationship reduces anxiety, builds trust, and enables the infant to explore. So the infant becomes active and competent in their sensory, mental, and interpersonal world. Activity, competence, and self-esteem build resilience. And so when we're thinking about fostering infants and young children, we're looking at therapeutic care with a secure base that reduces anxiety, reduces the impact of early damage, and promotes healthy development. So that obviously is a list that won't be very hard to translate into adolescence, where much of the same thing is needed. What we do understand, though, from a wealth of attachment research done by developmental psychologists, so it's really important to use our theory from Bowlby, but also to pay attention to the masses of extremely well-conducted research on attachment, which has, over the years, built up a whole body of evidence that says that Bowlby got his core concepts right. So we know that research on attachment in middle childhood and adolescence shows that they are likely to have a broader range of attachment figures. They're likely to be in a hierarchy. So it suggests to us that the secure base concept, the reduction of anxiety, the facilitation of activity, is likely to be drawing not only on a one-to-one relationship with one or two carers within the family, but can also draw on other relationships. Very helpful concept in adolescence. So what they need is the same kind of availability and sensitive, which in the attachment world means mentalizing, the capacity to think about your feelings and reflect on the feelings of others. In this case, the carers reflecting on the experience of the child developing the capacity to think about their own feelings too and reflect on the feelings of others. But they need exactly the same experience. They need to have their anxiety reduced in order to enable exploration, activity, and resilience. Absolutely core. And adolescent transitions for fostered young people are moments of great opportunity. So we have to stop seeing adolescence as a problem. It is a moment of opportunity. You can look at it in the brain science, but more in my territory, you can see the evidence of the way in which adolescents are turned around by foster carers, even if they're late into care. So adolescent graduates, which is Ian Sinclair's term for children who've grown up through the care system, and adolescent entrants, children coming into care in adolescence, who are currently causing local authorities a lot of concern as they are contributing to driving up the numbers, may both be bringing immediate and longer-term difficulties that need attachment-sensitive care. So it's really important that foster carers adapt their understanding of attachment theory to accommodate the secure base carer-teenager relationship. They've probably been told about attachment on their core training courses. How often do they hear attachment discussed in their reviews in adolescence, except in relation to they missed out on it earlier in rather a pessimistic way. And also, I think there is a lot of doubt as to whether or not adolescents should or should want to form new attachments in adolescence. But when we think about how we hopefully met our partners in adult life, we formed attachments to them at the ages of anything up to 80. So it seems to me very surprising that we might think that because you're a teenager, you don't need a secure base relationship. Of course you do. So what we've been doing at UEA is drawing on the research that Ainsworth did back in the 70s around the dimensions that facilitate security in infancy, linking that in with our fostering research to come up with a diagram that is a model for practice. So availability, sensitivity, acceptance, and cooperation. These are Mary Ainsworth's dimensions. What we did on the basis of our fostering research was to link that to developmental benefits, so trust, affect regulation, managing feelings, building the child's self-esteem, and this one, cooperation and effectiveness. how can we manage this autonomy in a relationship? I don't see that we have a problem with promoting autonomy and having dependency. Actually, what we need to be doing is trying to work out how autonomy is created within relationships rather than seeing them as alternatives. And the element that we built into this model was family membership, partly because we were researching foster care, but also it's very relevant across fostering, adoption, and of course for all children. Actually, children need in their secure base not just an emotional secure base, but a family to turn to, people that they can rely on. So family membership, although it's not part of attachment theory, is a key part of what children can draw on. So this model is now, has been developed and is part of Skills to Foster training, and we're about to produce 2 new guides, which I'll plug again at the end, in relation to using secure base in the work. It's not an intervention, it's an approach. It draws on aspects of attachment theory that are already in existence. Nobody needs to be told to prove that self-esteem is of value. But what we need to think about is how we can unpick parenting in a way that makes sense to foster carers, which is why the language is as it is. I'm going to use some qualitative data now from different studies to give you a flavour of how adolescents and their carers talk about each other. And I want you to think about the attachment strands in this, how it comes from some of the dimensions of that secure base star, but also how it reflects the significance of something called permanence. So this is Leroy. He's from our longitudinal Nuffield study, picked up at phase 3 at 18. So we interviewed these children at 3 stages. This boy was placed at 8, and this is him at 18, reflecting on his foster mother. My mum's helped me a lot because she was determined for me to do well. That's a really important thing. Other people believing that you can do well. It was my home, whereas before it was just somewhere I was staying. So immediately you tap into these dimensions of somebody who cared enough about them to want them to do well, promoting self-esteem and efficacy, but the family membership I felt at home. And obviously he refers to her as mum. Very highly disturbed 8-year-old, incredibly violent, incredibly aggressive, at 18 doing his BTEC in sports education and going great. Children also have to come to terms with the notion that these are not real parents to the outside world, even though they might be seeing their foster carers as real parents. So as they go through care, they will often, if they are able to be helped to do so, able to reflect on what being a mum or being a dad is all about. And this is a non-offending, this girl from the non-offending care sample in our Looked After an Offending project. When you think about what a mum is and what a dad is, and I compare it to what my mum and dad were like, her biological parents, I know they love me, but they didn't do their best by me, which they should when you bring a child into life, I suppose. And I just see a carer as my mum. She's doing well for me. This is a quotation from somebody I interviewed when she was 24 years old. Placed at 15, came into care having had a background of sexual abuse and physical abuse at 7, in a foster home that was probably not very warm, but nevertheless was stable, so I have mixed reports of that. But somebody at the age of 15, when that placement broke down, decided not to place her in residential care, but to give her another go at a family. And this is her talking about coming into this family at 15. When I first went there, I was, sorry, I'm going to get emotional here. They're the only people who've ever done anything for me. The first time I met them and David sat and talked to me as if I was something. I was somebody. He weren't talking to social workers, what does she like, but talking to me about it. And I just remember I just couldn't stop crying. I didn't know how I'd cope with all that, a new family. But they were just brilliant. They turned me right round. If it hadn't been for them, I wouldn't have got any GCSEs. I wouldn't have been able to read and write. I wouldn't have the life I have now. And the life she had at 25 was stable, in work, married, with a 5-year-old, mortgage. And what she'd been able to do, really, on a basis of a 2-year placement in this family, was to build the skills to go on to build subsequent relationships. Her relationship with her husband, her relationship with her in-laws, and of course the ongoing relationship with the foster carers who had been looking after her at that age. She is now 40 years old. I know her foster mother. She's still happily married and bringing up her teenage daughter. The meaning of permanence. So this is a foster carer now from the Care Planning for Permanence, another Nuffield-funded study, talking really about what permanence means. And I think it's this future anticipation which all children need, but obviously all carers need to have on behalf of themselves, their children and their family. Notice I put it at the bottom on this one. This is a child placed at 14, and she is now 17 at the point of the interview. In my mind, permanence is a word that means a lot. It means that Marie is never going to leave, not when she's 18, 19, 20 or whatever. If she goes to university, not when she's 25. She's always going to be part of our family. I'm sure when she's 36 and has got her own children, she'll be bringing them to us. I will probably be looking after them. We're always going to be her mama and papa. Now, this was a foster carer who saw herself actually as a short-term foster carer. She'd had about 80 children placed with her. But when this child intended also to be short-term, arrived at 14, they basically had such a strong bond together almost immediately that very rapidly this girl said, I want to stay in this family, and this family have kept her. And she's thriving and doing very well. This is a girl who still has contact with her birth family. I haven't got time to draw on that element, but most of these children will be also managing birth families alongside these. So she has got more than one mother, but that is part of the task that has to be managed.
Gillian?
Yeah, fine, thank you. And again, this is a foster carer from the care planning study as well, I think, saying of a 15-year-old. And again, I think what's interesting here is that the foster carer has bought into the official idea, which is that what we need to do for teenagers is train them for independence. So she's talking about using that word independence, but actually she's describing something quite different. I wish for her to be safely independent, for her to be part of our family forever. I mean, there'll come a time when funding from social services stops. If she's been able to move into somewhere independently, I hope it will be like she says, round the corner, and that she'll invite us for tea and she'll bring her washing home. She's talked about living with her friend in a flat, living with us till she's 100. So she's got these things in her mind. And really what we've got to do is hope that we can make successful independence a reality for her, you know. And one of the issues you find, even when you're interviewing, perhaps not even when you're interviewing, but when we've interviewed, I interviewed a 10-year-old who wanted to ask me, who was newly placed in a long-term foster placement, and wanted me to reassure her that her foster carers would pay for her driving lessons. And another child of 11 in the same study talked to her foster carers about saying, you will pay for my wedding, won't you? And actually, in that particular case, the foster carers were equivocal. And that was reported to me by the foster carer about whether they were really making that commitment. And that placement broke down. It's interesting, in a longitudinal study, you catch little echoes of things which make you worry. Fortunately, by the time we went again, she was placed with a fabulous foster family where she stayed into her 20s. One of the things that Judy asked me to pop into this talk, so I think it's connected with attachment. I think it's quite important. It is to do, and I'm going to be talking more about it when I'm here in 4 weeks' time to do the evening seminar. It's to do with how we balance what I'm describing as a parenting role, a parenting experience, with the professionalisation of foster care. So we looked at this very particularly in the last study. One of the things that we know from occupational psychology is that family, work, role and boundary issues are usually in relation to parents who work outside of the home. So work and family are considered as two different spheres of activity with different role identities and cultural meanings. For foster carers, their family is their work and their work is their family. And it's not the same as the family running a shop together. It's the very nature of their family-ness that is their work. So roles are not so clearly separated and boundaries are not so clearly defined. So how do carers of teenagers manage different and potentially contradictory role identities? And I think there are issues. People often think, when they think about professionalisation of foster care, they particularly think about teenagers. They say, well, we particularly need professional carers for teenagers because of the skills level and so forth. So we were interested in that. So what we found was that permanent foster placements can be successful where carers have different primary role identities. They might have a primary identity as foster carer, but they need to also accept the role of parent. They might go into this role thinking of themselves more as parents, but they have to accept that they are carers on behalf of the local authority or the IFP, their agency. Problems do occur where foster carers exclusively identify as carers but don't actually take on the parenting role or commitment. And there are also problems, maybe surprise you more, when carers identify exclusively as parents but don't accept their carer or role responsibilities. An example of that we had from that particular care planning study was around a foster carer and encouraging her teenage son to sort of form an alliance against the social worker. Oh God, it's your review coming up. Which is actually very unhelpful, doesn't help a child. You have to have something. And then when I looked again, so this is very helpful looking interdisciplinarily, that is a word, I get to occupational psychology and discovering that there was a whole body of work around the importance of integration and enrichment when you look at work across roles. So actually, where carer and parent roles were accepted and integrated, each role enriches the other. So being a good professional person going to your training course made you a more successful parent. Being a successful parent made you actually fulfill what the local authority wanted you to do. So it was important to do that. But we did find, using the secure-based model as well, that thoughtful, sensitive caregivers were also more likely to be able to integrate roles. And I guess that's not completely surprising either. So this is a final word from a teenager. It's a teenager talking about, this is from the offending study. I wasn't a good child because my birth family never showed me any love. I was always angry all the time. And then my foster mother saw what was going on and she knew. So she gave me love and she gave me what every mother should give their daughter. And I changed my ways. And now I don't do drugs or anything bad like that. Notice how, you see the secure base elements, you see the availability, the sensitivity, but it's very strongly worded in terms of family membership. She did what a mother should do for her daughter. That's what she did for me. So I think we need to work very carefully with our professionalisation, and we support that, of course, but we need to say to professional foster carers, it's okay to feel like a parent as well. And that's true for teenagers as well as it is for younger children. And just as I said, I'd do a little plug at the end. So BAF are producing 2 practice guides on the secure-based model, one for practitioners and one for foster carers and adopters. And those are coming out in a couple of weeks and being launched in London at the end of February. And I'd like to also thank very much Sandy and Gordon here today, who were part of the film that we made on attachment in relation to that work. So I was so delighted to see them here this morning. So welcome to you in particular.